So that's why I try to emphasize the importance of the evidence. So, but like you can suspect, after I added her small little website link and a couple little sentences about her to that 9/11 Truth Movement page, thinking maybe they would accept of her mentioning there, that got removed. So there was someone actively monitoring that page, because within just a few minutes, or even I think within the first hour of just slipping that on there, they had already deleted that link and deleted the 2 or 3 sentences I had added with her name. So I went through the appeal process. I provided sources. I provided facts to back up what I was saying. I provided her list of credentials to show that she is definitely a well-qualified scientist to be talking about this type of stuff. And they were giving me the same runaround. Eventually, because I would not let it go, and I kept saying, the reasons you're giving me are not adding up, they actually just banned my account and closed the appeal. And there's a Wikipedia policy that reports that discussions are to remain open for a certain amount of time. I think it's like 5 to 7 days, so that enough public moderators can come in and weigh in, so you get a diversity of opinions and get a more fair vote. But this small group of moderators decided to shut it down basically within a few hours. And so they violated their own policy in their censorship of me. And so this was just more affirmation to me and confirmation that there is a coordinated effort to try and prevent the public from learning about these easy to understand and easy to verify hard pieces of empirical data that show us what happened on 9/11. So that's kind of the buildup that led me to eventually question Mr. Gage in person, which is what you wanted me to do. So
talk about that. Of course, you have a video of this confrontation that's about isn't it as much as 10 or 11 minutes? But let's hear it live from Abe. What happened?
Okay. Yeah, you're right. It is. I was able to. It's a 2-part video. So I found out that architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, in their tour, you could call it, where different, someone was paying for Richard Gage to move around and give talks in various cities. And one of the cities he was going to be stopping at happened to be the city where I was doing 3 of my 4 years of medical school, Peoria, Illinois. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to question him about this. This actually was in April of 2011. So this was after Dr. Wood's book was out. This was after I had a much better understanding of the facts. I'd gone through the information several more times by that point. And so I wanted to question him in person and ask him questions, not to humiliate or anything vengeful, but actually just to see how he would respond when I would bring up these facts that he was refusing to address when I emailed him initially, and see how he would respond when he had the public staring at him, because he wouldn't be able to, divisively just quietly walk away from it like he did when they banned my account silently from their website. So I went to that presentation, and I had a friend come with me who filmed it. And it's 2 parts, because the first part is when I asked him questions during the standard Q&A session at the end, where they pass around the mic to various people in the audience that have questions. And then because I didn't really get a good answer to my question, I was able to stick around at the end of the show while they were cleaning up, and I was able to ask him the rest of what I wanted to ask. And he got the whole thing on tape, and his responses are really unbelievable. I won't try to describe everything in detail, because I encourage people to...
Give us 1 or 2 points of data that come to mind.
Yeah, so the questions I asked him why all of these important facts, such as the New York City seismographic data and some of the other things I've mentioned so far, why those aren't even found on his website, and why he doesn't even mention them in his presentation. But he does mention all of these subjective testimonial pieces of evidence, which are much weaker forms of evidence. We all know that the telephone game, where you say something to a friend and they whisper it in their friend's ear, and eventually by the time it comes back around the circle, you have an entire different story from when you started. And that's because testimonial evidence is a very weak form of evidence, because it's prone to bias, it's prone to mistakes, it's prone to different misunderstandings people have, and those mistakes can get passed on when someone gives their testimony. So in science, the gold standard of evidence is empirical evidence, which is evidence that you can observe with your own senses and verify with your own senses so that you can draw your own solid conclusions about it. So that's like things that you can see.
Perhaps aided by instrumentation as well, of course. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Like performing a study and having data where you can say, oh yes, that molecule did move 2 degrees to the left. I can see that right there. I agree with you. You know, it's not someone telling you what they saw. You can actually see it for yourself or witness it for yourself and verify it.
Yeah, it's about reality. Yeah, amen.
What was that?
I say it's about reality. That's a synonym for the truth. This is real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's reality testing, empirical evidence. Exactly. So I asked him that, you know, why don't you have these facts on your website and why don't you even mention them in your presentation? And, you know, his response, which I encourage you to look for the full response yourself, he basically said that he doesn't have enough time and they're trying to focus on the most, quote, rock solid forensic evidence, which is a direct contradiction to what I just asked him, because what I asked him is why he's not sharing the most rock solid forensic evidence, the empirical evidence.
Yeah, that's a lie.
He tried to make it sound pretty good. If you listen to him, he puts like a sleazy little twist on it that tries to make it sound to the unknowing public that there's a good reason for why he doesn't share certain bits of information. I think the next question was, you know, I don't remember exactly every question. One question was about why he has not pursued a court case like Dr. Judy Wood has if this thermite paper is so smoking gun. You know, and he gives the excuse that he doesn't have enough time, and no one in the organization has enough time, even though he's affiliated with James Gorley, who I believe is a high-ranking individual, the executive director of the International Center for 9/11 Studies. So he has the resources around him. He has people who have the legal knowledge, who have the finances. So it was very strange that he's not filed this evidence in a court of law, but ultimately the big part of the
all my praise to you, Abe Rodriguez, for this revelation, this exposure of who Gage is and what his organization is really all about.
Yeah, well, no problem at all. I'm just doing what's right. You know, I hope that any other concerned individual will take the facts forward and not be afraid to question whoever, whether it's a teacher they have at school or their parents or anyone that they feel deserves to know the truth. So,
well, I encourage our listeners to check out Abe Rodriguez. We've got 104 available, most of them short videos on YouTube, and educate yourself. Now, Abe, we don't have much time left, so I know you want to talk a little bit about methodology and what people can do to inform themselves and think this through for themselves.
Okay. I just wanted to mention one last thing about the confrontation with Mr. Gage, and then I'll quickly move on.
Okay.
The most important part with the confrontation came during part 2, when I was able to approach him one-on-one at the end of the talk. Once a lot of the people had left and trickled out, there was an opportunity for me to reapproach him because he, as you'll see in the video during part 1, he cuts me off quite a bit, so I was never really able to finish asking him the tougher questions. So in part 2, when I got to him one-on-one, I started to ask specific questions like, you know, you're an architect. Why don't you at the very least, talk about the New York City seismographic data? And that's when he actually said out loud, and it's on videotape, he says, I don't understand the New York City seismographic data. I've never studied it.
Yeah, he said he's not a seismographer. And here he is, an architect in San Francisco, where, hey, earthquakes do occur.
Yeah, exactly. And even if he wasn't an architect, the point is that the greatest point is that he's an individual claiming to present the most rock-solid forensic evidence, even though he's not, and even though he admits that he hasn't even studied the most important evidence, which is the rock-solid forensic evidence that everyone can agree upon by just going to the New York Columbia University Seismology Group's website and checking out the seismographic data from 9/11. And the second part that was very, very concerning to me of the second confrontation was when I asked him, well, how come you don't talk about other things as well, like the 1,400 plus mangled and warped cars? And he said to me that He says to me that, I don't know what can explain that. He says this on video. He goes, I don't know what can explain that, after I mentioned the cars. And then he goes on to say, I don't want to ask questions that will just make people ask more questions. I want to ask questions that will motivate people to ask for a new investigation. And it's just unbelievable to hear someone admit on tape at the very...
You know how many, with the original Pearl Harbor in 1941, the so-called surprise attack by the Japanese, you know how many investigations there were by different committees and the Defense Department, or well, the War Department then? There were nine investigations. Now, we've had probably as many as a half a dozen, right, with 9/11. And here it is, basically the government's investigating itself. So truths do actually escape with this cloud of words, but that whole thing is just a fraudulent way to go from a policy point of view. What to do? We as Jesse Ventura says, there's enough meat on this bone to begin prosecutions. That's what we really need.
There is, and that's why Dr. Wood's court case got all the way to the Supreme Court in October of 2009 before the judge dismissed it without hearing it, because cases that are nonsense, they don't successfully get appealed to that level. They get dismissed way down low on the food chain. And so you've got to have a lot of evidence behind what you're saying in order to make it that far. And I fully agree with what you just said, because there is a lot of meat on the bone here. There are so many verifiable facts that you can know, and to actually just understand what happened to the building on that day without having to speculate or theorize about it. So it was just amazing to hear Mr. Gage specifically say, in addition to the fact that he hasn't studied certain bits of evidence that are very, very important, to also say, I don't know what can explain that piece of evidence, literally admitting that the thermite explosives nonsense that he just promoted at this presentation I was at does not explain all of the evidence. Yet he claims that it does. And so it was just amazing. And it's on videotape. If you just search for the video, it's called Richard Gage Questioned at AE911 Truth Presentation. And the date is April 12th, 2011. That's when it happened. So, you can see that for yourself.
Now, you've got videos on a lot of other aspects of 9/11, the Hutchison effect, the Boyd Bushman, Stephen Jones and Niels Harrit. One I just watched was about the psych experiment, how peer pressure can lead to different behavior than when you're decision making alone. But out of all those videos, which ones kind of come to mind as important for our listeners to go look at?
Well, that's a tough question to answer because there's quite a few. But if I had to just choose one, I would say that the most important video on my entire YouTube channel is the one that is the cover of my channel, which is just an unedited, high-definition, slow-motion clip of WTC-1, the second tower to go down, turning to dust in midair. And it is high-definition, close-up, crystal clear, in slow motion. So you can watch that thing and pick out a steel beam and just watch it disappear in midair. It literally disintegrates.
It's only isn't it only a minute and 12 seconds? It's pretty brief, but it's very impressive for those who aren't aware of these towers being turned to fine powder.
Yeah, exactly. And you can also see the aluminum cladding that was on the exterior of the building that's popped off because those pieces are much smaller in size and they're all grouped together because they all were on the outside. You can see how those are completely unaffected. There's no large dust trails coming off of those. It's just these large steel grids that are arranged in Chex-like patterns, almost like Chex Mix cereal or wheat Chex, as Dr. Woods refers to their appearance. You can specifically see those are the things that are just turning to dust in midair. And some of them you can actually see completely turn to dust before they pass down to the bottom of the screen. And it's mind-blowing. It really is.
It is. And that's part of our problem in terms of breaking through, because they used black technology, secret or semi-secret, both the airplane frauds and